You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 3, Kidnapping, by R.A. Consul.
Chapter 22 Backroads. Kuro felt as though the only reason he hadn't died yet was that he was too cold to do so. It seemed rude to complain to his rescuer, though, so he extended a thumb skyward as a sign of life and appreciation. At his hip, he could feel the others exiting his waterlogged satchel. 2 women and a raccoon, all still breathing. That was good. They, too, were wet, the water having poured in while the bag was submerged. He could recognize his own delirium, as his first concern was not their safety, but that his homework was probably ruined. He switched between fits of coughs and giggles as he pondered the absurdity of that worry. The magical infusion of warmth gifted to him by Ms. Crawley was not immediately welcome. The numbness had been a blessing, and with the return of feeling, his body could complain more fully about the suffering it had just endured. His joints and muscles were insistent that he had just swum the full distance through the Blandlands waves, despite the entire ordeal lasting less than a minute. It took no longer for Ms. Crawley to remove any evidence of the plunge. In moments they were warm and dry. The magic was so strong, though, and expertly applied that Kuro started to doubt it had ever happened. Only once it was certain everyone would survive did Ms. Crawley take the time to observe the surroundings. She looked first to the Vale, the ocean beyond, and the faint island in the distance from which they had just somehow escaped. Then she turned to Kuro with an arched eyebrow. "It's a Luton thing that I can do," he said. "Sometimes, sort of," he added. He could see the academic curiosity spread over her, and she peered at him the way Mr. Pendragon had at his bracelet. She, however, was able to tear herself away from the intriguing creature before her to attend to the situation. They were on the shore of a harbor used exclusively for transporting people to and from Niflheim prison. It wouldn't take much time for a few skilled wizards to fix the ferry, and even less for a new group of hounds to show up at the mainland docks should the warden choose to call them. "We had better get moving," she said, as if guiding students on a field trip. "I'll take care of making a path." The snow parted before her as she led a march through the woods and away from the harbor. "Arthur, do you think you can keep us warm as we go?" "Yes, Miss Crawley," he said obediently. His eyes narrowed with focus, and a steady heat filled the space around him, fighting back the bitter cold of the western wildlands winter. "I hate to be a naysayer in this," said Lucy, "but it won't take long for the hound to catch our scent. We'll be back in Niflheim before sundown." She was right. Roche's minions wouldn't even need a hound. Their tracks were pathetically easy to follow. While Kuro had, rightly, not been asked to help with the magic, he did have something he could offer. It wasn't so much something he could do as someone he knew. He felt bad asking for her help again after she'd already come to his rescue twice that day, but she seemed eager to do so again. The west wind gathered into a terrible blizzard. The world around them became a blinding sea of white, and any trace of their passing was wiped clear in an instant. They, though, were left in a bubble of relative calm, with just enough breeze to tousle Kuro's hair. Both women gave him the same look, wary and curious. They seemed to agree it was not the time to pry, as though pointing out that what he was doing was impossible might make it so. Instead, Marie's mother turned her questions to Ms. Crawley. "Do you know where we're going?" "East," replied the teacher with waning confidence. "We're in the Western Wildlands," Lucy said, with increasing frustration. "We could walk for weeks without seeing a soul. Marie could be long dead before we find our way out of this." "Have you a better plan?" asked Miss Crawley, frustration edging into her voice. Lucy squinted past a thumb held at arm's length as though she were measuring something at a distance, then scanned the sky like she was tracing stars, although there was nothing to see. The world was a sea of white within the blizzard. "Yes," she replied with confidence, "but only slightly. Follow me." She turned and began walking northward. Ms. Crawley struggled to clear snow fast enough for her pace. "Where are you taking us?" To Moot Point, said Lucy. That meant nothing to Crow or Arthur, but it shocked their teacher. You're taking us to Moot Point? How? How do you know where it is? How can you find your way in this blizzard? Who are you? Marie's mother clenched her jaw. She was clearly a woman unused to having to explain herself. She seemed keen to leave the trio of wizards behind rather than do so, but they were bound together by their situation. Without them, she would be frozen solid within the hour. Without her, they'd be lost. I am Marie Akinwande's mother, she said firmly, making it clear that this fact was not up for debate, although it was odd that she did not claim a name for herself. But I am not her birth mother. I was Princess Dane's handmaiden. When the palace was attacked all those years ago, I was preparing Marie to be presented to the court. The fighting was terrible. She grimaced as she recalled the events of that day. I was quickly cut off from any help, and I'm no wizard. I couldn't defend myself, and even less a baby. And so I ran. I slipped out into the streets and then into the Bland Lands. You all know there were no survivors, just little Marie. She had no family here, so I took her to her father. The story was starting to flow more easily, long-held secrets pouring forth after being sealed away for years. Poor man didn't even know Marie existed. Eddie, Princess Dane, was a bit of a wild child. She slipped away from her royal duties whenever she could, going to parties in the Bland Lands. She and Peter dated for a while. I had the dubious pleasure of being the only one she talked to about her dalliances. When she got pregnant, she started to behave herself a little better. That meant no more trips to the Bland Lands. He thought she had just dumped him. Fair enough, really. Effectively, she had. He wasn't even a stray. It wasn't like he could have become king. Took me ages to find him. All I had was a name and a Bland Lands photograph they'd taken together. Peter is a good man, she said wistfully. I showed up in his doorstep, penniless, claiming that the baby in my arms belonged to him and that her mother had died tragically. He could have slammed the door in my face. Should have. Instead, he took her in. Took us both in. There was nothing left for me here. And Peter was wonderful, but hopeless. I stayed to help. He needed it. So did I. I lost everything in the coup. I raised her as I would have my own child. By the time I'd worked through my grief, I found that I'd fallen in love with Peter. We got married, had more kids, and for 15 years I did everything I could to keep Marie hidden. I lied about everything, who I was, who she was, her name, birthday, family, everything. I got the poor girl exorcised to try to get her to stop doing magic. She's going to be so angry at me. She laughed a little through a grimace at the thought of that future conversation. I faked my own death and pretended to be a Catholic accountant from Belgium just to distance myself from the summer court. I even convinced Peter that it was better that Marie didn't know about her birth mother. You kidnapped the Princess of Tiernanog and kept her hidden in the Bland Lands, said Miss Crawley, not sure whether to be impressed or aghast. She should have been a queen. A puppet queen at best, Lucy snapped back. You don't know the court like I do. Every noble in the realm would have been trying to get their slimy hands on her. That is, if she wasn't assassinated the moment she was discovered alive. The kingdom could sort itself out. I did what was best for my daughter. Why did you let her come to Avalon? Asked Arthur, his monotone making him seem entirely unmoved by the tragic tale. Lucy sighed heavily. I didn't have much choice. Do you know how they get Blando folks to agree to send their kids to mysterious schools they've never heard of and can't visit? They bring them to an information session right beside some tear in the veil, where they magic them up, wash away their doubts, and make them believe it's an incredible opportunity. Refusing would have raised suspicion. She didn't look the part of a princess. The orthodontics had done away with the overbite. Blandland's hairstyles helped. When her eyes started to look too much like Eddie's, I bought her the blockiest glasses I could get her to wear. I probably could have stopped her from going, she admitted, though not with regret. But honestly, she was miserable out there. She didn't belong and didn't know why. I hoped she'd be happier with people like her. I'm glad she made some good friends. She smiled weakly at the boys following in her wake. Until we ruined everything, said Kuro. It was as much my fault as yours, replied Lucy. I should have destroyed those old photos years ago. I didn't know my kids had found them until your visit. It was foolish sentimentality to hold on to them. I wasn't going to tell anyone, said Kuro. I wish you could have told me that, said Lucy. I wish I would have believed you. Knowing you'd seen those photos made me panic. I grabbed Marie and the bag I always kept for just that situation and ran. What I didn't know was that they didn't send Marie back unattended. They have plainclothes guards watching over the fireflies on holiday. It's meant to be for protection, said Ms. Crawley, in case they remember too much or too little or start trying to do magic and need to be rescued. Just our luck it was a brainwashed hound on duty, grumbled Lucy. Any showing up got his attention, so he followed when I ran. As soon as I used the tear in the veil to help cover some distance, he decided something was up and grabbed us. That's about all I know. I woke up in Niflheim. I wish I'd just told Annie the truth while she was there. At least then I'd know Marie was in trustworthy hands. Who is Annie? Asked Kuro. Ein, said Lucy. Lady Ein, Arthur's mother. We're old friends. Arthur gasped. Annie? He repeated. She won't even let my dad call her that. We were close once. Who is your dad, anyway? I was so desperate to ask while she was there, but I was trying not to seem too keen. It was all I could do not to burst out laughing as she made up stories about herself. My father is Sir Talon Dubois, Arthur said. Lucy's pace slowed as she clambered through her mind, searching dusty piles of neglected memories, trying to tie meaning to that name. The mutt? She finally shouted in shock and disbelief, and then burst out laughing. And he married the mutt? All three jaws of her traveling companions dropped at that moniker. Dubois had some unflattering nicknames, but even those respected how dangerous he was, and this woman was laughing herself to tears at him. I really needed that, she said, fighting to regain composure. The mutt? Asked Kuro. He was in school at the same time as Annie and Eddie. Just a couple of years back. Absolute menace. I think he spent more time in detention than in class. Elven eyes, Acadian air, a Tiernanog nose, and a wolf familiar the size of a bear that he never put away. Am I remembering right? That's him, agreed Arthur. Annie and the mutt. Lucy laughed. I wish Eddie could see that. Ms. Crawley interrupted the reminiscing. You still haven't explained how you know the way to Moot Point. Lucy grumbled at being forced back into the present situation. Because I am, or was, a spy, she said flatly. I infiltrated the ranks of the royal servants to keep an eye on the wizards. My job was to send word to the Council of Courts of any plans they had to expand into the wildlands. Oh, don't look so shocked. Wizards like land more than Newton like chocolate bars and have vastly less use for it. Someone needs to make sure they're keeping to their treaties. I know it's rude of me to ask, said Miss Crawley, but you're not merely a stray, are you? Lucy rolled her eyes at the wizardly dismissal of ordinary people. No, I am not merely a stray. She paused as if readying to fight if her next statement was not taken well. I happen to be a changeling. She was startled by the lack of impact that made. That explains a lot, said Arthur. Is that why my mom didn't recognize you? And why you look so much like Marie? Added Kuro. Have you been trying to look like her to help hide the fact that she's not your real daughter? She seemed almost more bothered by their lack of reaction. You aren't afraid of me? She asked. We're all on the same side here, said Ms. Crawley in a friendly manner, making no motion to reveal the other changeling in their midst. You're really not afraid of me? She confirmed. Not going to hunt me down for stealing children? You had a pretty good reason, said Kuro. Besides, I'm not human either. You're not? No, I'm a half-Luton and half... He paused and took the opportunity to check with Ms. Crawley. Other stuff? Mostly wizard. the teacher confirmed. Lucy was taken aback. Is that possible? Sort of, said Kuro. I don't work very well. That's why we got so wet crossing the Vale. They traveled for a time with Marie's mother asking Kuro about what sort of thing he was. Sharing was oddly liberating. His nature wasn't a secret by any means, but even so, he hadn't been able to talk freely about it. For the first time, he could talk about his origins without editing out Phineas. He could describe his life in and before Detritus Lane fully. There were things he could say now which he'd never been able to tell even Arthur. Those things, gaping holes in Kuro's story, his friends had learned to navigate around. They cared enough not to ask, but now he could fill them in. He wasn't truly free, he knew that. Ms. Crawley's trick was clever, but the curse woven through him wasn't so simple to untangle. He knew, should he ever hear that voice again, he would have to obey. Until then, though, he was unburdened. They traveled through the day, winding hither and thither with no apparent rhyme or reason, but with absolute confidence and always upward into the mountains. Despite being able to see only a few yards through the snow, Lucy navigated as if pulled by an invisible force. How do you know where you're going? Asked Kuro. We can't even see to the next hill. The ways between Niflheim Castle and Moot Point are well known, she said, as though that didn't create far more questions than it answered. Noting Kuro's bafflement, she explained further. Niflheim was the stronghold of giants before the Jotun Wars. The wizards claimed it along with much of what is now considered Alfheim. There are paths, ferry roads, winding from it to Moot Point. Nothing as grand as Zephyr Way, but they're there, and you can feel the paths if you know them well enough. We are getting close, she added after cresting another hill. I should warn you, they may not be happy to see us. I should expect not. They were words that bypassed the ear and went straight into the brain, made not of breath and voice, but the clattering of pebbles and the rustling of pine needles. Wizards arriving uninvited could cause quite a commotion. Emerging from the blinding white of the blizzard was a canine form, long and lean, with a devious smirk he could not shed. I wondered, when the west wind had worked herself up into this blizzard, if it had something to do with her beloved, said the coyote. Is this coyote a friend of yours? Asked Lucy, making no effort to hide her suspicion of the creature. We're acquainted, said Kuro. I'm wounded, laughed the coyote as he fell into step beside the boy. As they marched up a final hill, the wind began to fade, the blinding blizzard weakening into a gentle breeze upon which cotton ball snowflakes danced. A broad valley stretched before them, surrounded by mountains and filled with snow. A stunning lake of sapphire blue, half frozen and half steaming hot, filled much of the basin. Slicing through the lake, dividing the two halves and reaching into its center, was a long peninsula, at the end of which was a dome of stone, ice, carved wood, and living vines. Scattered about the lake were homes, clay huts, stone cottages, log houses, canvas tents, and lodges of sticks and brambles, all as different as their residents. Pixies flitted about on scintillating wings, while giants lumbered slowly past. With the passing of the storm, groups of gnomes, more beard than body, rehung laundry outside their mushroom huts, while nearby green-skinned goblins shoveled out the entrances of their burrows. Flickering here and there were Luton, appearing and disappearing, helping and hindering their neighbors in equal measure. Centaurs chatted with Tuatha, hags haggled with Sasquatch, and wild animals wandered throughout. It was wonderful chaos, a mismatched patchwork of peoples arrayed across the most perfect of landscapes. Welcome, said the coyote, though unwelcome you may be, to Moot Point.
Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.